Тревога! Тревога! Это ваши дела! Тревога! 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 Come together. Cover yourself. There you go. Hit. Yeah. Hit. Hit. Get it covered. Hit. Through the middle. Through the middle. Through the middle. Black. Please, search warrant! Police, get down! Hallway left! Open door right! Sheriff's office! Sheriff's office! Sheriff's department! Hallway left! Southwest all right! Southwest all right! Hallway right!
We keep the weapon pointed downrange in a safe direction. Turn the weapon to the side, insert the magazine, push down with your non-firing thumb on the slide stop. Magazine is loaded. Put the safety on and you're ready to fire. Next, you want to get your proper grip. Make a V with your hand, insert the weapon in the V, have the weapon lined up straight up your arm. You want to grip the weapon front to rear with your strong hand, finger off the trigger. Wrap your weak arm or weak hand around the front hand. You want to push out with your strong arm, pull back with your weak arm. This is called the Weaver stance. Both thumbs on the same side of the weapon. And you get your stance where you're comfortable with. Line it up according to your target. Bring the weapon up to eye level. You want to get a proper sight picture and sight alignment. Sight alignment is the alignment of the front and rear sight with each other. You want the front sight evenly spaced between the rear sight, the top of the rear sight even with the top of the front sight. Once you have that aligned, you line it on your target. You focus on the front sight. The front sight is in the center of your target. The next step is trigger control. You press the trigger without disturbing the sight picture. You want to take your safety off before you fire and press the trigger and let the weapon fire without disturbing the sight picture. This is a Springfield Armory 6x20 by 56 millimeter government model scope. We have illuminated reticle, and it has 11 position setting inside, which illuminates the reticles or the crosshairs in low light situations. Advantages of that would be if you're shooting into a tree line somewhere at dusk or dawn, and normal black crosshairs you would lose in the darkness. With this, you turn it on and you get a illuminated green reticle, which you'll be able to see the target with and be able to hit your target with it in low light situations. It also has a bubble level on the inside to tell you when the scope is parallel to the ground. If you're canted right or left, the bubble won't be centered and your zero won't be correct at whatever range you're shooting at. It also has adjustable parallax, which is adjustable from 50 yards out to infinity. It's this one here is a 6x20. It has a variable power from 6 power up to 20 power. It's got the external target knobs, which are quarter-minute clicks of wind and elevation, and they are guaranteed for life. Flash suppressor on the M1A is designed to suppress the flash of the weapon to dissipate the fireball coming out of the weapon. Standard M1As, the flash suppressor is about the diameter, the projectile coming out. It's a little bit above that, so the projectile just clears the flash suppressor coming out. On our match grade and sniper weapons, we ream out the flash suppressor to avoid any contact of the projectile with the inside of the flash suppressor. And that's what they call national match flash suppressors. They're reamed out so to have clearance, so there's no way the projectile will come close to it, and it gives you a lot more clearance coming out of the barrel. First I'd try to bore sight it, but it's hard to do with an M1A because you can't see through the chamber and look where you're sighting. So what I'll do is, if I have a zero with open sights, I'll lower my cheek piece and put it on a target, and then come up to my scope and try to click the scope onto the same point to get where my open sights are, if I know my open sights are zeroed. That'll get me close to the target. And then when I fire, I'll fire maybe 1 or 2 rounds depending on the range and how clear the target area is. And then from there, I will, if I see it on the paper, I will adjust the turrets to bring the crosshairs up to where the projectile was hitting. Like my first shot down there I saw was, it was outside the scoring ring at about 11 o'clock position. So I brought the crosshairs up approximately 6 inches and left approximately 4 inches, so the crosshairs will be at where that projectile is, and then I fire again and it should be pretty close to center. And you might have to do that 2 or 3 times before you get it perfectly zeroed.
Very cool.
Well, when you're shooting 1,000-yard with a rifle, you use this web sling and you have it wrapped around your arm, and you have your rifle slung in. You're not resting on anything. You have to be totally self-supporting. And usually have a big heavy shooting jacket on with rubber pads on the elbows and in the shoulder. And one of my things is I use a lot of firm grip. It's like spray glue. And you spray it on the stock, you spray it on your elbows, you spray it on your shoulder, and when you're in there, you're glued in. And that mainly helps for rapid fires. For 1,000-yard slow fire, it's coming down, your cheek has to come in the same place every time. Everything has to be consistent. And any little gust of wind will blow you off target. Your target at 1,000 yards using a GI front sight or a national match front sight will look similar to like a BB on a ruler. I mean, you normally see a bullseye on a front sight is about the same width at 200 yards. At 1,000 yards, it's so small, it's hard to judge center of your target. Usually you put your square front post on the target frame itself when you're shooting 1,000 yards, because that's how small the target is at 1,000 yards. Well, they generally operate in two-man teams. You have one spotter and one shooter, and the spotter will sit there and receive communications if they're communicating with outside source, and also read the wind and just observe for, you know, keep an eye on what's going on around the situation, and give commands to the shooter on you know, target information or wind conditions if the wind's changing, or just basically being an observer. That's it, basically being an observer for everything going on. Wind, it depends on how critical the shot is. At 100 yards, it would have to be a pretty gusty wind for it to matter, unless you're shooting at a hostage situation where you have to hit a very small target. In competition, we very rarely bother with changing wind conditions until you get like past 200 yards, because it's just an NRA competition target. You have a lot more, you're not talking sniper situations, you're shooting at a bullseye target, and one click will move you out, you know, approximately a half a minute. At 200 yards, that'd be 1 inch out. And generally, if we see at 200 yards, we see a wind come by like it is now. You can see this wind coming by. That might be worth maybe a click, maybe 2 clicks at 200 yards, if that. I mean, it'd have to be continuously blowing like that. 300, 500, 600, 1,000 yards, it goes up. It drastically increases. Any little breeze will knock you off target. That's pretty close. All right.
The stance that we use here is based on the original research done by the British. It's called close quarter battle. It was developed by the British SAS, and the pistol system is based on the physiology of the human body. This stance takes into account reactions of the human body that are not taken into account by some other stances. It's very easy to go stand at a target range and perfect your style, whether using a Weaver stance or any other type of stance. But when you get in a situation where you're in a darkened room and there's a severe threat that you know that you're going to die. You get that rush of adrenaline into your system. You're completely pumped. You're afraid. Everything in your body is tight. And all of a sudden, all the practice that you've ever done on the range means nothing. The system that we teach is a gunfighting system, not a target shooting system. We stand facing the target, comfortable with our center of gravity lowered slightly, because you want to have a firm, comfortable stance. You want to be in balance. So we teach people to lock their arms straight out, keep those elbows locked, and take the force of the recoil of the pistol in their shoulders. This way, the tightening of the large muscles isn't going to distort their stance. You push the weapon straight out at the target, keeping the weapon on your eye line, but keeping the focal plane of your eyes on the target itself, and double tap very quickly. When you're afraid and you get a jolt of adrenaline into your system, the large muscles of the body tighten up because they're infused with blood, because you want to either fight or you want to run away. Well, fighting in the early days of human evolution meant picking up a rock or a stick and slugging it out. So you need lots of blood in your biceps, triceps, in the large muscles of your back, in the large muscles of your legs, so you can run away. Okay? So these all tighten up, just like when you get a pump in the gym. Okay? So you want to lock the pistol into place so that the tightening of the muscles doesn't distort your stance. Another effect of adrenaline is you tend to get what we call target lock or tunnel vision. You focus incredibly tightly on the source of the danger. So we don't fool around with the sights too much, all right? Especially in close pistol contact between 9 and 21 feet, which is where most pistol confrontations take place. We just teach the person to bring the weapon up to their eye line and just point it directly at the target, center of mass. Keeping their eyes focused on the target, not focused on the weapon. Because in reality, in a high stress, high danger situation, you're not going to be able to focus your eyes on the weapon anyway. You're going to have target lock on the source of your fear. Well, for the very reason is that it can be maneuvered so effectively. If you have a long weapon and you're in very close quarters, it's very hard to get that weapon around. Where with a pistol, I can move this pistol anywhere as I'm walking, as I'm moving. I'm just following the pistol, all right? I can pull it in close to my body to go through a tight place. I can put it back out, all right? I can move over here. I can move over there. If I've got a rifle, it's just clumsier and more in the way. And the tighter the quarters get, the more clumsy it becomes. So if I'm in a small room, in a linear space, I'm going to want a small weapon, either a pistol or a very short submachine gun. Well, you always want to shoot the most dangerous target first, and that's a whole art of identification. The danger can be based on proximity. The danger can be based on the power of the weapon that each individual is carrying. And you've got to make a real fast decision. If I've got a guy 6 feet away from me with a pistol and a guy 20 feet away from me with a submachine gun, which one is more dangerous? Well, there's no pat answer to that question. Has the guy with the pistol already drawn down and coming into his stance to shoot at me? Or is the guy with the pistol still sort of carrying the pistol at his side, and the guy with the machine gun is already looking like he's pointing his weapon at me? I got to make an instant decision which one of these people is the greater danger to me and engage that target first. And there's so many variables that you can't come up with hard and fast rules. You've got to judge and make that decision in an instant. Wound ballistics is a pretty misunderstood field. A 9mm round, or any round for that matter, will basically do two things. It will destroy the tissue that it comes in physical contact with for the diameter of the round and for the depth of its penetration. So you have a hole, which we call the permanent cavitation. That means the tissue is actually destroyed. It's not going to come back. It also pushes air in front of it. And when it penetrates, it'll also push a piece of your clothing into the wound, all right? And this air and this soft material push tissue out of the way and damage it, but it'll spring back. And we call that the temporary cavitation. One of the reasons you want to double tap with a small caliber round like a 9mm is, if you can double tap quickly, the first round causing the permanent cavitation, the second round will actually enter into the area that's temporary cavitation and destroy that tissue while it's still compressed, causing much more trauma. Pistol ammunition and most rifle ammunition won't do some of the things you see it do in Hollywood, all right? The real serious result of this cavitation is that blood vessels are destroyed and people bleed to death internally. Now, if the heart muscle is hit, it can paralyze the heart will stop pumping and you die from cardiac arrest, basically. If certain parts of the brain are hit, the brain will stop sending signals to the involuntary muscles like the diaphragm and the heart, and everything in your body will shut down and you'll die almost instantly, okay? But for the most part, anywhere else that you're hit, you're going to die of internal bleeding, all right, if you don't get medical care quickly. If you do get medical care quickly, they can probably fix you up, because basically what's happening is it depends. If a big artery is cut, blood is pumping out. If smaller ones, it's just seeping out. One thing a bullet won't do that you always see in the movies is it won't pick you up and throw you somewhere, okay? Newton's law says that for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. This is the recoil that you feel in the weapon, is the reaction to the bullet coming out the other end. If that bullet would pick up a 200-pound man and throw him backwards, the recoil of the weapon would, by necessity, pick up a 200-pound man and throw him the other direction. So when you see in the movies that someone shoots and the bullet hits him and he's thrown backward against the wall, that's Hollywood, all right? Many people are shot and don't even realize it, especially if they've got a lot of adrenaline in their system. They'll take a bullet and continue doing what they're doing and realize later that they've been shot. Untrained people who are afraid of weapons will get shot and they will fall down immediately, not because the bullet has damaged something in their motor system that causes them to fall down, but because they have been trained to know they're supposed to fall down, so that's what they do. Intelligence is everything. Every piece of information that you have increases your chance of success. If you don't know exactly what's in there and you have to sort of go in and make it up as you go along, there's a tremendous possibility for taking casualties in the team. If you know what's in there and have had a chance to study the plans of the floor space and know where the furniture's placed and all that, then your possibility for success increases. If you've had the opportunity to rehearse in an identical space, you'll find little pieces of dead space and little places where there's one member of the team might come into danger that you never envisioned from looking at the plans, and your chance of success goes up even more. So the more intelligence you can gather, the more chance you're going to have of being successful in the mission. No pass, no fire line is just an imaginary point inside of a structure where two teams are functioning, one on each side of the line, and you want to eliminate any chance that the teams are going to come into conflict with each other. So you put up a line on the floor plans or whatever and say, you don't shoot past this line, you don't go past this line. That way neither team becomes involved with the other team that's operating in the same structure. Dead space is any space where a human being could be hiding, a closet, an area behind a piece of furniture, an open door into another room, where you cannot visually see into that space upon your initial entry into the room. Dead space has to be checked before the team can pass that space in case someone's hiding in there who would then have a field of fire behind the team. I think as a general rule, you'd say yes, you'd stop them from taking off again. The way that rule has to be modified is if you don't have a capability of assaulting that plane right now, and the people on board say, you know, if you don't let us take off, we're going to start killing a hostage and throwing him out of the plane every 5 minutes, then you've got to assess that. If I was a commander in a situation like that, I think I would tell my people to take out the tires of the plane immediately so it's no longer a point of discussion. Say, gee, we'd be glad to let you take off, but it'll take us several hours to jack the plane up and put new tires on it. And my people shot the tires out without authority, and, you know, I wish there was something I could do to change that, sir, but there isn't. And now it's no longer a matter for negotiation. It's just a situation that exists that they're going to have to deal with just like you are. Police have to operate under much stricter guidelines. They're going in there, and their mandate is basically to only use deadly force to protect their own lives or the life of the hostage, whereas the military's mandate is to use deadly force, period, you know, on everybody but the hostage. When I first started training police SWAT teams, I was given a class at the Boston Police Academy, and after the first hour, one of the lieutenants came up to me and said, look, some of the high brass is a little upset about what you're saying here because you're talking an awful lot about killing people, and we don't really like to hear that. And that was my introduction to the difference in the mandate of police and military, and I had to sort of restructure my training. When we started training SWAT teams for a living, kind of tone it down, talk about taking people into custody, talk about, you know, restraining people, arresting people, things that we never even really gave any consideration to in the military, to be honest with you. They had a contained situation that they allowed to become mobile. When the situation is contained in a space that you've got a perimeter around it and you know what that space is, you have the plans for that space and you know exactly what you have to deal with, you're in control to a certain degree. Once you allow them to leave that space and become mobile, you've lost whatever control you have. You know, now things can develop that are totally, you're totally unable to plan for, because the terrorists are making the decisions of where to go and how to go, and you're basically just following them around trying to you know, plan on the move, and it never works out as well. Partly because of the Munich Olympics, the counter-terrorist teams have made a hard and fast rule that once you've got a contained situation, you never allow it to leave containment. Well, a plane's what we call a linear target, and it has more in common with a train or a bus and in some ways a long hallway in a building. Because you're confined to a linear space, you don't have the freedom to move laterally. Everyone pretty much has to run right down that center aisle because there's nowhere else to go. So there's specific ways of handling a linear target. You've got to be very fast because everything's so channelized that any time that you slow down the action, it creates a much higher degree of danger than it would in a large open room. Everybody's ability to fire at you is focused in that narrow area. So the main thing you have to do in a linear target is increase your speed. Then later the Air Force asked us to come down to McGuire Air Force Base to help them design some tactics for specific types of airplanes and specific types of situations. And those tactics involve very extreme situations, so they were a little different from conventional airplane tactics, and a little more violent and a little quicker. So I'm not sure exactly what the Air Force would want me to talk about in terms of those. I have to be a little bit circumspect about the specifics, but basically that involved taking out the tires of the plane so that it couldn't leave, specially made jeeps coming up and putting the team on the wings, and the team running up the wings and blowing their way into the plane with pre-prepared explosives and seizing the plane very quickly. It would be very difficult for an independent organization, not a nation state, to develop a biological weapon, all right? Because you have to have laboratories, you have to have doctors, you have to have research facilities. Now, to develop a biological weapon that will work well, it has to have a fairly long gestation period before it becomes deadly, because you want people to be able to pass it to other people. If you have a biological weapon that kills in minutes, the first people exposed are going to die so fast that they're not going to have a chance to pass it on to anybody else. But if you have a biological weapon that takes days in order to spread it throughout the population, you will in effect spread it out through the population of the entire world, because right now there's so much international travel that on any given day there are people moving between every country on Earth. So if a country, a rogue nation, were to develop a biological weapon, say to use against America, that had, let's just assume a gestation of 5 to 7 days to give it time to infect a large portion of the population, it would almost certainly be spread to almost every country in the world, because people would be flying. Pretty soon this agent gets out everywhere. Now, who's going to be the most seriously affected? The countries with the worst medical care. And what are those? Those are the third world countries. So a country like America, with extremely good medical facilities in every city, well-trained doctors, trauma centers, the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, is going to have a much better chance of finding a way to control this than third world countries. So the country that released the biological agent is probably going to be affected more severely than the country they're targeting. So what is the point? The other thing is, if the United States found out that that country released a biological agent, we would probably respond with all-out war, possibly even nuclear force.
Upon arrival at an initial situation, it's usually handled by patrol level field operations types of officers. And if somebody doesn't come out of location, usually it's because they're in a position of cover concealment, they refuse to surrender, and there's a threat to the lives of officers, the public, or hostages. In that case, when the situation appears that it's beyond the resolution of your normal patrol officer, then they contain the situation, and usually some type of departmental policy comes into play where they call their SWAT team. There's a response from the SWAT commander who assesses the situation and then deploys his officers to best resolve it. That situation must be resolved by that particular SWAT team or through mutual aid, the assistance of allied municipal SWAT teams who also may be nearby. And it's entirely up to them to resolve it. The only time that an agency like the FBI would be called in would be if it was the suspects involved in it were political terrorists, or it was a response to a federal facility where they had jurisdiction. Well, the military's primary responsibility in a hostage rescue, of course, is the safe rescue of the hostages, but they also have an acceptable casualty rate. If during the rescue it's necessary or some of their personnel are killed, well then that might have been worked into the plan. That's not an option with a municipal or civilian law enforcement agency. The plan is designed to protect the officers that are involved in addition to rescue the hostages. But in a civilian law enforcement operation, there is no acceptable casualty rate for either the officers involved or the hostages. The only successful hostage rescue would be the safe rescue of the hostages and that all officers survive the incident. This is the Beretta Model 92FS. It's the current military sidearm for all services. Fires a 9mm round. It was originally tested by the Air Force in '79. The Army declared the tests invalid. They relooked at it again in 1983, and there were two pistols that passed muster at that time. It was the Beretta 92 and the SIG 226. The Beretta outbid the SIG Sauer, and it became the official sidearm of the U.S. military. This is the HK Mark 23 Model O SOCOM pistol and 45 ACP caliber, 12-round magazine capacity, semi-automatic, and one of its unique features, it has a night suppressor, manufactured by Knight Armament Company out of Vero Beach, Florida. Reduces the decibel level to the sound of approximately about a 22 caliber. This is the main Special Operations Command pistol over and above what the regular military is issued, the Beretta Model 92 FS. Very reliable pistol. I had to go through a lot of endurance testing in order to become the SOCOM pistol, and it's an excellent weapon.
Excellent. All right.
This is the Desert Eagle. It's available in 357 and 50 Action Express. This particular model was originally manufactured by Israeli Military Industries, and then the parts imported here and constructed by Desert Eagle. This fires a 357 158 grain bullet. It's also available in 44 Remington Magnum. Very effective, high caliber weapon, very reliable. It weighs almost 3 pounds, so there is hardly any felt recoil. This is a standard MP5A2 fixed stock. It's a 9mm, fires a 30-round magazine. Has an EOTech electronic sight, rear aperture, safe, semi, and full automatic. Very reliable, the basic bread and butter of any entry team. One of the standing features of it is universal. You can get parts for this worldwide. The magazines themselves, 30 rounds, this one happens to be a dual magazine clamp. By inserting one magazine into the weapon and depleting it, then it's just a simple matter of removing the depleted magazine, inserting a fresh magazine for a very quick reload. We'll talk about the basic MP firing stance. First of all, you need to be in a position where you're very low to the ground in terms of your center of gravity. That way you have a very solid, stable firing stance. One of the unique characteristics of the HK stance is that it's very flexible so that you can move in any direction. It's highly mobile in that you're able to move forward, backwards, to the side, and react to whatever threat that you're faced with. The basic stance is your feet face towards the target. Your knees are bent. The stock is solidly in the pocket of your shoulder. The head is mounted at the stock in a cheek well. Your elbows are in. Your hands lightly resting on the forend. Your hand is on the pistol grip, and your thumb is on the safety, ready to engage the safety. Your shoulders are hunched together to form this pocket so that the butt does not slip out of your shoulder, and your torso is actually hunched forward so that you're on the balls of your feet. This way you absorb recoil when you're firing. The reason your toes are pointing towards the target and your knees are bent is that it allows you to move very easily towards the target and keeping the sight stable so that you don't bounce the sights off the target. The HK 3-point sling is a very good system, attaching here to a pin at the front of the forearm and also here in the center pin, wrapping around your shoulder and then coming back here to the slider in the middle. One of the advantages of it is that if this weapon should stop or you needed to transition to another piece of gear, you can just allow it to drop and it will hang in front of you where it's readily accessible if you needed to get back at it again. Additionally, it can be carried, it can be put completely behind you, out of the way, and rapidly acquired when necessary. This is the MP5 SD, the suppressed version of the MP5. It is the A3 variant with the collapsible stock. It has an integral suppressor, fires a 9mm, similar to all the other HKs. The unique feature is that this suppressor is actually part of the barrel, bleeds off a high volume of the gas, makes it a very quiet weapon, reduces the decibel level very low. This is the HK PDW, also known as the personal defense weapon. It's the standard receiver of an MP5. It has a shortened barrel, vertical foregrip, and it has an extending stock. It snaps out like this, snaps back. It can still be fired in the closed mode. It's really unique in that it can be concealed in a shoulder harness for executive protection specialists. It has a high rate of fire, 900 rounds per minute, which is very fast, and you'll get to see that here in a second. Here's HK's newest weapon, the UMP. Incorporates a retractable stock. Has majority of it's made of plastic except for the bolt and the barrel. Incorporates a vertical foregrip. Uses a 25-round magazine and 45 ACP. This is an EOTech electronic sight. Very rapid target acquisition. It incorporates, in addition to the electronic sight, also standard sights in the event that your electronic sight should not work. This is an Uzi invented by Uzziel Gal. It was a revolutionary weapon designed from several World War II type weapons. It has a stamped receiver. It's highly concealable. It has a fold-out stock. Fires a 9mm. Incorporates a grip safety. It's one of the most popular weapons in the world. This is the M16A1 one of the current U.S. government military battle rifles, fires 5.56, 30-round magazine, has a forward assist, has a standard A1 sights, very accurate, very reliable, and one of the mainstays of the U.S. service. This is the G3A3 made by HK. It's in 7.62 millimeter. It's a main battle rifle. You would not be taking this in a location like you would an MP5. Because it's a larger caliber, because it's a heavier weapon, it has a much more extended range than the MP5. Now, since you'd be using this in exterior areas, like not inside buildings where you might be doing CQB, you could use a different type of stance. You could use a traditional rifle stance for this, for standing. This is the HK G36K E1. Has several revolutionary features. Fires a 5.56 military round. Has a collapsible stock. It's almost entirely made out of polymer. A couple interesting features that it has. It has this 3-power optical sight with crosshairs, and then additionally it has this LED lighted at 1-power scope on top. Very versatile weapon. Barrels are interchangeable in the field to various configurations, and it has several mounts for attachment of additional accessories. This is the Austrian AUG in 5.56 millimeter. A little bit different, it's a bullpup configuration. The receiver and ejection port are actually back here where a stock would be in a traditional rifle. And the barrel begins here, so we have a full 20-inch barrel in a very small size. A couple interesting features of the AUG is that a 1.5 power optic sight built into the weapon as a carrying handle. Additionally, you could have it with scope base mounted down on the receiver. It has a vertical foregrip, has a safety right here above the trigger group. And another interesting feature is that very quickly you can exchange barrels for a longer barrel, or you can change trigger groups, have full auto, semi-automatic trigger group. The gun is almost entirely made out of polymer, except for the barrel, the receiver group, and part of the bolt group. This is the HK M1 Super 90 tactical entry gun. It has a 14-inch barrel, semi-automatic with a 5-round magazine capacity, accepts a large variety of ammunition from double-aught buck to slug to tear gas loads. Has ghost ring sights, pistol grip, polymer forend, and buttstock. This forend is a Laser Products 3-volt tactical entry light. Very necessary to have on any type of weapon, some type of light system. Go into low light conditions, you need to have some reliable way in order to identify your target. This is the HK21E, fires 7.62 millimeter, and it can be converted to fire 5.56. Right now we have it configured to fire belt fed, but it also can be configured to fire from the magazine. It has a high rate of fire, approximately 800 rounds per minute, and it's an excellent alternative to a squad automatic weapon. This is a custom-made 50 caliber BMG sniper rifle. Fires the 50 caliber BMG round, accurate out to 1,600 meters. Single shot, bolt operated, has a Leupold 6.5 by 20 scope. Good against light armored vehicles and anti-personnel at great distances. This is the DefTech Model 25 diversionary device. What you use this for is you throw it in a room, and anybody who might happen to be in the room is subjected to a loud sound, 174 decibels, and a bright flash, 2.4 million candelas of light. What happens is it evokes a physiological and a psychological response that actually makes the person hesitate, stun them if it will, and prevents them from accessing weapons or escaping, which allows an entry team a brief window of opportunity to enter a room and resolve the situation. Now, this is a level 3A. It'll stop up to 3 rounds of submachine gun in a 1-inch square. So if somebody took your submachine gun away from you and put it up against your body and fired a 3-round burst, it's designed to stop it. There's various levels, 1, 2, 3, 3A. This one at level 3 will stop 3 rounds of the hottest 9mm ammo that's available. It will not stop rifle rounds. It's only good against pistol rounds. There's numerous types of configurations for personal gear that you might have to have. First of all, this is a level 3 body armor. You'd only be wearing this if you're going to be doing an entry. There's no way you'd be able to swim or parachute or anything like this. But it's mission configurable because it has removable pockets which the operator can put in any part of his body that he wants, and there's a wide variety of pockets that are available, all the way from small utility pouches to magazine submachine gun pouches, radio pouches, communication devices like this lash pocket with the transmitter in it. The features in the back are available: a pocket for trauma plates, a Camelback water hydration system. Lower down you have a regular equipment belt with a sidearm, Safariland tactical holster, gas mask pouch. And the unique feature of this is that depending upon what the mission is, you can pick the gear in the pockets and then configure the vest. So when the time comes that you actually need a piece of gear, you know exactly what pocket it's located in, and you can retrieve it as quickly as possible.
This pistol is a pistol that we build on contract for the FBI SWAT teams. It's not used by their general agent population. It's more on their tactical groups, their SWAT team and their HRT team. It's a pretty unique pistol. It has a lot of features that have trickled down from the competition market that have gone into this gun to make it more suitable for some of their tactical applications. It appears on first glance as a standard run-of-the-mill 1911. It has a match-grade barrel in it, completely hand-fit. The slide to frame is national match configuration. The front strap is checkered totally by hand. There's beaver tail grip safety, ambidextrous thumb safeties. It has night sights that are powered by a nuclear gas which glows forever without any external light source. All of the FBI pistols are coated with a material called black tea. It's a baked on polymer finish that is totally corrosion proof, very lubrous. It's excellent. It can be in a saltwater environment without any type of corrosion, and it is a super accurate and extremely reliable semi-automatic pistol. It's a completely hand-built custom pistol. The main reason it's more accurate and reliable is, again, it's completely hand-built. It's fitted to the closest tolerances possible, actually. There's approximately about 16 hours of labor involved in building each one of these guns. And then when we start with these pistols, it's not manufactured from an existing factory pistol. It's completely built, again, with national match components that have to be hand fitted. The slide will not even fit on the frame. It has to be physically hand filed, hand honed, and hand fitted, which gives you the ultimate fit. Same with the barrel and some of the other components. They're all hand fit, hand tuned, and hand adjusted to give, again, the ultimate in accuracy. A pistol like this has to be as accurate as humanly possible for the job that it's required to do.
The things you look for in a sniper rifle to increase your accuracy as much as possible. You don't want any parts of this rifle moving, especially parts that are out on the barrel. The last 4 inches of the barrel are your most accurate portion of your barrel. On this rifle, the gas system has all been drilled and screwed together, so now it's one unit and does not move. Underneath here is a heavy barrel. Standard weight barrels have a tendency to have what they call a barrel warping. As you fire, the barrel will actually warp one way or another, wave. A heavy barrel has less consistency to do that because of your heavy barrel. Heat distortion is another concern. As this barrel heats up, this will actually stretch, sometimes as much as 80 thousandths. If something stretches in here, makes contact with any portion of the stock, your accuracy will be affected by that. Basically, after the shot is fired, you want the rifle to go back to the same position as it was to just before you fired the shot.
Great.
These are two different style of sniper rifles. This one has a walnut stock with a linseed oil coating on the outside. This is a Macmillan stock, which is actually a fiberglass stock. A big advantage of the fiberglass stock, on a normal day, both stocks will function the same. However, if you take this from normal conditions to extreme conditions such as rain or high humidity, this stock will have a tendency to want to warp, which will affect your point of zero and your accuracy. This stock, no matter what temperature from 0 to 100, will remain the same no matter what the humidity is also. You do not have to aim. You can quickly gather your target acquisition, put the red dot on the target, and wherever the red dot is where you make your hit. Follow-up shots are really quick. FBI, DEA, entry teams, SWAT teams will use these on MP5s as they sweep a door. They can use both eyes open, have total peripheral vision on each side. They can see their partner on the left, and they can still keep all their peripheral vision to the right, allowing a red dot sight in front of them. If they see a target, have to take it out. The red dot goes on the target and take it out. Sighting's simple. There is no front sight post and rear sight post alignment. You put the red dot on your target, and that's where you hit.
One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. Well, a terrorist, if you're going to use the book definition of what a terrorist is, the one that would come to mind first off would be Menachem Begin. Because Menachem Begin, when he was a member of the Palmach, was doing everything that we find so reprehensible today. He blew up the British Officers Club, not only killed British officers, but their wives and children. You know, that is a terrorist act. A terrorist is someone who uses terror as an instrument to further his ideology or his demands on a society that he thinks is treating him unfairly. To say he's bad or good, that's really left up to history. But a terrorist is someone who uses terror as a tool. Well, you're going to pick a piece of terrain that you can hold. If it's a stairwell or it's a room, or it's, you're not going to box yourself in, you're going to leave yourself an opening out, one that you can cover at the same time, and still your primary job at that point is to ensure that those hostages that you temporarily rescued and have to wait to move out of danger in that, stay that way. They stay alive, they keep all their limbs in that. So your life is forfeit at that point. Well, The sane man's going to make sure that he picks a plan and a place where he can actually accomplish that without having to spend his life as a currency to do the job. And that's essentially what you do. You pick a spot, or the team will pick a spot where they know they can leave you with the hostages if they're continuing to leapfrog and clear other rooms, or they know there's another bad guy somewhere in there and they've got to clear it before they can get the hostage out. And they'll pick a spot that they know if you're in trouble, they can come back to quickly, and a spot that you can defend and actually keep the hostages alive. The military wants to get in, get it over with. The police are used to dealing with situations where they have, time is on the side of the authorities when you have a static position. The worst thing you can do as a terrorist is get in a position where they've got you surrounded. As long as you're mobile, you can throw off the rhythm of what they're trying to do. The military essentially is going to look at a target much different than the police do. They're going to look at it for its pure intelligence value and try and sift the facts out and put together a plan. The police have a bad habit of seeing a boogeyman behind every tree. And they use excessive force for what they need to actually accomplish. The military is going to use economy of force, the least amount of force that they have to use in order to resolve the situation. And that's not the case with law enforcement. The military never had any intent of getting involved in counterterrorism. What happened was, when Yuri Andropov was the head of the KGB, there was a directive that said that they would use the autonomous groups around the world, the freedom fighters, so to speak, and they would support them with money, ammunition, training, support in any way they could to further extend Soviet foreign policy. So they started supporting, like, the Red Brigades in Italy, the Red Army faction in Germany, the PLO, the Hamas, and either through themselves directly or through their surrogates, the Syrians and the other non-aligned states, so to speak. And the military was forced into a situation where we had vast resources that were committed to NATO in Western Europe, which were directly under the gun of these terrorist communities. And the terrorists themselves realized that they could actually influence U.S. policy by attacking those facilities and infrastructures. So the military, about the 70s, early 70s, started getting into the business. Sure can't swim. SEALs, my problem with the SEALs is that they have a great PR department. And when it comes to anything that has to do with the water, they're better at it than anybody else. But they expanded their venue to where they're operating outside of their environment. If you want to take over an oil rig from somebody, go get the SEALs. If you absolutely have to blow it up tonight, go get the Navy SEALs if you can't get the Rangers or Marine Corps. But when it comes to being able to actively destroy a cellular organization because of your expertise and depth of expertise, the SEALs are not the people that you want. They don't have it. They are direct action motivated, direct action targeted. They don't have the depth of experience and knowledge to actually be called, in truth, a counter-terrorist unit. They are a strike force, and that's what they should be used for. Unfortunately, in some cases, they don't use them for that, and that's where the failures come in. Consistently, operationally, where they have success, as a historical fact, would be the British SAS. And not because they're better trained or they're better motivated, but because their government gives them the ability to do the job without placing roadblocks in the way of it. When the Brits had the Iran embassy, the entire British government from Margaret Thatcher on down fell behind the SAS and said, okay lads, you have a difficult job, what do you need? They needed to look at a building similar. They found a building similar, moved everybody out of it and let the SAS practice in it and then actually go in. They needed to use a special technique. They were given carte blanche for whatever they needed to do it. So
they have a leg up on everybody else as far as doing it. Compared to the Mossad and their capabilities, still the SAS, a far superior, unit, motivation-wise, training-wise, and operational success-wise.
There's probably no finite number of bad guys that would draw you out, but that may be a factor. If you had a situation that you may not even describe it as an act of terrorism, if you had domestically a gang of bad guys who were holding a number of hostages. One example is of prison riots that have occurred, fairly infrequently in this country, but if it was in a federal facility and they're holding a number of guards and there are a lot of prisoners who are armed, that's likely to draw HRT. Usually a situation where there are multiple bad guys, and they're fairly well armed, and maybe it's unique, particularly if you're talking about they're in an aircraft or maybe a multi-story building, or they're in somebody's embassy, that kind of thing, where there's clearly federal jurisdiction, then HRT is going to likely be the operational unit of choice for that kind of thing, as long as the bad guys will wait till HRT gets there to do what we need to do. I don't know that I recall the exact wording of it, but I think it's an act of violence that occurs by one or more individuals where there's a political motivation to do it. You're trying to either gain attention or create some sort of act that achieves a political end with the violence in itself, which, for example, maybe a bank robbery, the motivation is to gain money and get out of that. Most acts of terrorism, they're looking for the publicity. They want to create an environment where they draw a lot of public attention, a lot of media attention that tends to blow the thing out of proportion to the actual impact on maybe the volume of people, number of people that are the victims of this. The HRT would normally receive information about a hostage situation in probably two ways. It would come down from our headquarters, because normally when they deploy the hostage rescue team, it's going to require an assistant director of the criminal division level before they go out. But invariably, you're going to get information in advance from the office or the area of the country where the situation is occurring. In fact, it may have been ongoing for a period of time, and you're watching it and seeing whether it accelerates to the point that they think the hostage rescue team is going to be needed. So a number of ways you're going to find out about it. However, to actually be deployed, it's going to require at least the assistant director of the criminal division level giving the okay to move the team out.
Okay.
The plan, and I'm certain it must be the same as it was when I was there, is what we call 4 hours wheels up. That within a period of 4 hours from the time that we get the word to go, we will be in an aircraft airborne to a destination or less. Meaning that if you got a call out, if most of the team members were at home, because HRT is not, or was not, at least when I was a part of it, the situation, unless we knew well in advance that something was going to occur, we don't have a team of people just sitting in a room waiting for the balloon to go up. Most of the people are home every night, and let's say you start with the worst case scenario, that at midnight you get the call, or in fact I've been involved in where we got the call at 1:30 in the morning and we were in the air well before daylight. But you get a call out, they have to go back to Quantico, getting your gear, whatever equipment, vehicles, that kind of thing you need to the airport facility where you'll be deployed from. and then you've got to load all that stuff on an aircraft and the people and go. But even that, we were always able to stay well within the 4-hour time frame. Well, I think it becomes a judgment call by the whoever is in charge, overall in charge of the operation on the ground, working that through headquarters of the FBI and making the decision whether they're going to make it known or not. I think trying to get them there as quietly as you can and also house them in a facility that's fairly close to where the action could take place, but not known to the point that you have press surrounding your living quarters and making it very difficult for you to do tactical planning or to rehearse what you're going to do before the event occurs. I think probably as an HRT commander you would hope that the word doesn't get out at all that you're there. But it may be to the advantage of the negotiators and to the overall scheme of trying to resolve this thing peacefully to tell them that, yeah, they're here and they're ready to go if you don't come out. When HRT arrives on the ground, the plan is to always have an emergency response plan, assault plan, in place ready to go within 1 hour of the time you're on the ground. And you hope you don't have to use an emergency plan because you haven't had an awful lot of time to plan it, and no time probably to rehearse it. So you're in a situation where you're telling the command element at that location that within an hour I'll have a plan put together that if we have to go in, we'll go in. So you gather as much intelligence as you can in about 30 or 45 minutes, and you brief your guys, and you hope that you don't have to go, but you have them geared up, ready to go in. And then from that point forward, or basically from the time you hit the ground, you're starting to do your what you call a deliberate plan, which is to plan with as much information, intelligence as you can gather, giving you the biggest advantage. For the longer it goes, the better you can plan what you're going to do, and you just keep improving that plan, your assault plan, as the time lengthens. If you remember that the hostage rescue team is a law enforcement agency, and the motto of the team is to save lives. And those people that are part of that team take that very seriously. So you're always searching for ways to resolve a tactical issue without using lethal weapons, if possible. And there's obviously a lot of research going on now, a lot of research going on at the time that I was involved with the teams, looking for methods that can resolve it without killing people. I think it varies individually about how long people can tolerate not being deployed. I think one of the responsibilities for command level people is to keep the training interesting, or try to get people involved in operations in small groups, even if it's not an actual HRT type event. One of the things you're doing though when you're selecting people for that business is trying to determine whether they can tolerate these periods of time where they're constantly having to stay up. But you have to kind of roll them through where you train hard for a period of time and then back off a bit and give people a breather so they don't get too stale in what they're doing. Sort of like a manager of a baseball team trying to decide when a pitcher comes out and when he doesn't, whether he's tired or not. You're doing that with your team personnel all the time. Because one of the problems you have is that you're dealing with some fairly high energy, bright, capable people who have succeeded in most everything they've ever tried to do in life, and they're not going to readily admit to you that they're tired or they can't go now or they need a break. So you have to kind of read that between the lines. HRT is a full-time job for the folks as a counterterrorist group. So, and it's rare that it's a 40-hour week. So they are constantly working on their physical skills, whether that's conditioning or whether that's firing weapons or working on, hand-to-hand methods. They're also studying the specialty skills that they may be used as communicators or snipers. Assaulters are constantly working on CQB capability. And one of the things that I think that helps keep them mentally active and working hard, the way we would set it up is to have all the research work, or the bulk of the research work for new ideas, new weapons, new approaches, new equipment, whatever it might be, is being done by the operators too. We know that bomb making information is in the internet and is readily accessible to people that know how to use it. We know that some of the groups out there use the internet to exchange information among themselves. So it's certainly another communication facility for these folks. It's also a way for them to gain information and intelligence. In a lot of ways, that internet is a huge library for them to learn about weapons and tactics. So it creates, there's a lot of good with the internet, but it can also create a lot of problems, or potentially create a lot of problems for the law enforcement side. From a tactical point of view, does the HRT or SWAT within the FBI, or probably even other law enforcement agencies, maintain some database of potential target sites? Yes, they do. And I am certain that continues to grow. As people look at sites and think about the possibility, yes, I am certain that that's a continuing and growing concern.
Counterterrorism usually involves taking proactive steps to prevent terrorism from occurring. Anti-terrorism assumes that terrorism has occurred and you're going to be responding to it. And in that sense, you will take not necessarily legal measures to prevent that group or the individual or the organization from being able to do the same act again because they've already done it once. You're going to take an anti-step. There is a significant legal difference there because one is a response to an illegal act, and you respond with a potentially also illegal act in the anti-terrorism option. Counterterrorism is always done within the law. What you're doing is setting up within the legal bounds restrictions that can be made that will make it less possible for terrorism to occur. We train counterterrorists not to act like policemen, to go in and in fact try to arrest them and carry them out legally and read them their rights and provide them with counsel. When you're dealing with terrorism and you know that it's terrorist and not simply a common criminal, then the first requirement is to be able to make the hostages come out alive, which means that you'll go in with all the force necessary to take out any individual who might endanger those hostages' lives. Law enforcement and the military have known this for a long time, that the difficulty of training someone to be a very specialized counterterrorism expert, a part of a very highly elite, specially trained team, means that they have to have stepped into a different type of role that plays by different rules, and that in effect socializes them to deal with situations in a completely different fashion. It makes it very difficult for them to take orders through a general command structure. It makes it very difficult for them to be able to step back and negotiate or allow this kind of discussion to occur, because their training has said that they must in fact do it very quickly, they must be able to operate independently. And what we then create are people who are going to be, in some respects, desocialized as well. Because what you've created is someone who is, if the situation breaks down badly enough, potentially a very incredibly efficient terrorist, because they have the skills and they have the knowledge British are a better example because they bring theirs in, and you have to be able to give up your rank when you go in. You can be a major, you could be a lieutenant, whatever, and you'll give it up and start over again. You're going to be in it probably about 10, maybe 12 years, and then you're going to be past the age where you can physically do what they have to do. That means that you're going to be offered either a desk job, a training job, or connections out where someone will have uses for you in that same kind of field. And that Britain with an empire has a number of countries that can offer a good place for them to come and help train in their military. But it does mean they can never go back into the ordinary status. And for the first 10 years or so, when they were doing a lot of training in that direction, and for the first several years that we did it, we didn't plan ahead. And we did have people who found themselves at 35 ready to either retire to a desk after having trained intensely and planned and participated, and then it's over. At 35, you're not ready to retire, and you don't want a desk job. Not after that. So there's a sense in which all the countries who have these kind of squads have a huge responsibility to make sure that these people have a future that is, in fact, within the legitimate sphere of law that they've been trying to operate in. Most of the modern terrorists, and that includes terrorists in both developed and undeveloped countries, have been, to a degree that previously has not been seen quite to this degree, desocialized. And that what you're looking at then as a terrorist is looking for an individual who's looking for something to believe in, and lacking the socialization process that would have provided norms and structures and resource groups and individuals who might have mentored that problem. That means that you'll get someone like Timothy McVeigh, but you'll also get individuals like the leaders of the Aum Shin faction in Japan. You'll get individuals in Germany in the Red Army faction. You'll get a variety of different people who have very different backgrounds. They're from very poor, they're from very wealthy. It's not a matter of economic class, and it's less a matter of social class. It's more of a factor of being, in effect, desocialized. The terrorism that we had seen in previous centuries had primarily been people who had a political problem with a specific individual or group within control of the government and were wanting to be able to affect. But those usually tended to be, fairly well educated. They were older, what would you say, college age or a little older. You don't get that kind of profile. You get both very young and very old. You get both college educated and those with high school diplomas. But you're getting primarily people who have been literally desocialized. That means they may have started in the social system, but they spun off. Somehow it broke down for them and it never came back. And that is disturbing because there's no control factor then that would make it so that they would say, I wouldn't kill, these are innocent people I can't kill. Think of all of the different refugee camps you have worldwide. There are people who are displaced. Now the parents can handle it to some degree and live, but the children are going to grow up desocialized. And we saw in the Middle East how bad that situation can become. Now you not only have there, but you have Yugoslavia, you have all over Africa, you have desocialized people. And another generation growing up that way, and that should be of concern. The threat of religiously motivated terrorism is greater than simply the terrorism that we had had to deal with up until fairly recently, which is primarily politically motivated. Not only is it more prevalent, but it's incredibly more dangerous. A crusader is almost impossible to stop because there's nothing that can be negotiated and offered to them that is worth what they're willing to die for and be rewarded in a future life. A political terrorist has a political agenda which is at least potentially meetable. A religious fanatic does not usually have what could be called a meetable agenda and no negotiating points. And so not only is it more prevalent, but it takes fewer of them to create a much more tense and impossible situation. Aum Shinrikyo was, in some respects, at a cutting edge of this move toward religious fanatic terrorism in industrialized countries. The religious fanatic terrorism had occurred in the less industrialized countries, but not been as strong a factor in the industrialized ones. For that reason, Japan, like probably the United States, Britain, and most other countries, were looking for politically motivated groups with an agenda that was going to make certain requests, demands that countermeasures could be put in place to deal with. Instead, they were faced with a large, relatively unstructured group with a very widespread membership and not a clear agenda on specifically what it wanted or why. It was a religious cult usually doesn't have a specific set of agenda items that it wants to see occur. That meant that they were going to be, how would you anticipate what they would do in order to be able to have something, sort of an amorphous change in the system occur? In that sense, Japan was no less prepared than the U.S. was, for example, in the emergence of someone who had been a part of a militia group here, because militia groups had traditionally not been regarded as being a dangerous potentially terrorist threat. And so we were equally taken aback by the shifting trends in terrorism. The media and terrorism have a very ambivalent relationship, because terrorists do tend to use the media as a wonderful tool to reach that audience that they need to make their action successful. The concept of using that same tool by the governments that are putting together a response to terrorism is actually an excellent idea, as long as what you're trying to do is at least more than just deterrent. A deterrent, yes, because you would be able to demonstrate very carefully and very thoroughly how well equipped you are to deal with that problem. But also a way of being able to persuade the general population that what you've done, in fact, stands within the law and was, in fact, a balanced, proportionate response to what was, in fact, a critical situation. It both reassures then your general population that you are, in fact, abiding within the laws rather than, in fact, breaking the law to enforce the law, as well as giving those who are considering carrying out some type of terrorist event similar to this the understanding that you can meet that challenge and you can meet it effectively. The age of hostage taking is not completely over, but substantively over in most industrialized countries, partly because there is very effective counterterrorism, both tactics and techniques practiced and reinforced with the technology available. The difficulty is that it is not at an end in the less industrialized country, as we saw in very recent events. But it's also true that part of the reason for the demise of hostage taking is that we have now, because terrorism is a media event, made it more attractive to simply blow the plane up and not have to negotiate, not have to worry about security measures, not have to meet, in fact, that counterterrorism tactic. For 2 or 3 decades, people researching terrorism have said that the use of a chemical, biological, or nuclear weapon would never be an attractive enough option for a politically motivated terrorist group, because the negative impact on the audience would be so huge, and the audience would be so turned off, if you like, by, no matter how legitimate your cause, by the number of deaths and the destruction caused by that kind of action. What is disturbing is that that is less of a deterrent for chemical or biological or nuclear weapon use by a religiously motivated group, because they're doing it for what they feel to be a higher cause. In which case, whether that general audience understands and knows and appreciates your higher cause is less of a concern. So there are more and more of these groups. They're more likely to be willing to use it, which raises the danger level on the use of the non-traditional weapons. Our U.S. system does allow the purchase of everything from sarin and ricin and things like this to, I found a record of an individual who purchased bubonic plague, freeze-dried bubonic plague, from one of our own research centers. Oh, yeah. So it shouldn't surprise us that they were able to purchase that here. Yeah, there are a couple of things. One that we've already touched on to some degree, and that's the idea of the use of the non-traditional weapons. That those things that 2 decades ago we assumed would be sufficient to prevent the use of those weapons, or to preclude the use of those weapons by politically motivated groups, is no longer in place. Now you have so many groups that are not politically motivated, who have a religious agenda, that would be willing to sacrifice a few thousand, a few million people if that was in fact what the cause required. That does worry me, because we don't have adequate security around all of these weapons built in, because we have not assumed that that was going to be the critical point in the future. But I think we need to, in effect, reevaluate where we're going with this. The other thing that worries me intensely is the problem of security, and since you mentioned 2 of them here, of airport security. industrialized countries have an enormous responsibility, and they've moved on it fairly rapidly, excluding the U.S. We are several, unfortunately, steps behind most European countries in airport security. We're moving in that direction, but it's not a coordinated effort in terms of all of the countries' airports moving at the same time to require the same types of security. The result is that we are almost an incident waiting to happen in airport security, and that disturbs me a great deal because we know that it could happen, but the cost of it is going to be huge, and the cost is not only in terms of money. Part of it's money. If we put in place the chemical scanning machines that would theoretically be able to stop something like the Simtex coming through, in order to be strong enough to have detected the weapon used in the bombing in Lockerbie, you'd have to have had something calibrated to pick up your credit cards. Can you imagine how much difficulty there would be in instituting that kind of system? And they're incredibly expensive devices to be able to construct. So they're multi-million-dollar devices to construct. That means you're going to have to do multi-million-dollar devices that will only work if you actually have them calibrated down to where everybody's credit card is going to get beeped. The other problem is the public response. Most people complain about having to wait just a few minutes to do their luggage scan. If you do what a lot of airports are doing, and that is try to match luggage to passengers, which we do not do on any internal flights for the most part, then you do add anything from 10 to 20 minutes to 2 to 3 hours, depending on how intense that scrutiny is going to be. In Tel Aviv, you're looking at 4 hours. In London, it's fairly fast. Here, we don't match it. And the net result is that if someone boarded a plane in one city, bought tickets in 2 directions, sent his luggage in one, flew on the other, you're looking at a plane that's going to blow up. That would not have happened had our airport security been, in fact, up to the grade that Europe and most of the rest of the industrialized world have. So, do you know what they had, what was part of the explosives that they were using? Sodium cyanide. You know what they were trying to do? Create a cyanide gas that would be pulled through. It was not meant to be that hot. They missed it by a few degrees in what they were trying to create in the temperature. And instead of vaporizing it as a vapor, they effectively incinerated it. But we came within a few degrees of having Wall Street breathing cyanide gas, both of the buildings, because the two share air ducts, as well as in effect blowing it out over Wall Street. That's why you're saying, would a group use that? Yes, in fact, groups have used it. With the availability of nuclear material and the nuclear technology and understanding of how to build so much more accessible, it is feasible that terrorists would be able to obtain nuclear devices. It is much less clear that they would be able to produce it themselves. The probability would be that states or portions of states would be able to construct those devices and sell them. And there are a number of states where the ability to be able to offer that as a resource for a particular group or as a marketable resource for a country where the economy is struggling would be an incredibly attractive option. Countries will not probably would not use nuclear weapons with any flexibility because the probability of response is huge. Groups can easily do that because it would be very, very difficult to have a counter-terrorism attack that would in fact carry out a nuclear attack on the terrorist group because the group is scattered. It's not in any particular accessible site. So a group would be very unlikely to be able to have the technology and the resources and the facilities to be able to build, but they don't have to because there is enough of it spread now among a number of different countries where the capability of building such a thing does exist, and the desire perhaps to support someone else's efforts might lead them to sell that technology. You have nuclear devices that are about this big that you can put into small pocketbooks and briefcases. They don't have to build them. Why would they have to build them? When the Soviet Union dissolved and Russia pulled back, they left a large number of this kind of material, and a good part of it disappeared. We have no way of assessing exactly where it is. It's out there somewhere, which means that they don't have to build it. They'd be stupid to try to build it. That'd be a waste of time, resources, and energy. They could purchase it. And that, to me, is much more frightening than whether they could ever get the facilities to build and to hire enough engineers who could do it for them. They don't have to. Why would you do that? Why would not just purchase the weapon already made.
Domestically speaking, when you, as a negotiator, I'm dealing with a hostage taker or a group of them, more often than not, I would take a middle of the road approach to it. I am neither your friend nor your enemy. I am here to try to resolve this without getting you hurt and without getting those hostages in there hurt. That is, and without getting any of the law enforcement people out here hurt. In other words, we're trying to avoid violence. That's the main purpose of this thing. Can we talk about this? Can we resolve it by just merely talking? There might come a point in time when, in order to either get their attention, get them to focus on what you're doing, or because they are being irrational or beginning to talk about using violence, then you've got to let them know that you also have the capability of producing more violence than what they're able to produce themselves. And at that point in time, more than likely, you let them know in a myriad of ways. You can choose any way that you would like or that would be appropriate for your situation, to let them know that, hey, I have got a group of people out here that can really rain down a lot of violence on you in a very short period of time, and I will guarantee that you will lose. If that's the way you want to go, then I will step out of the way. But if you want to talk and you want to resolve this calmly and peaceably, I'm the guy you need to talk to. As a general rule, and we have no set fast rules, but one of the loose rules that we have got is that as soon as the negotiator is called to a particular place to handle a hostage or a crisis situation, the negotiator is to make contact as soon as possible. So generally speaking, we'll do it by whichever means is available at that moment in time, whether it be the telephone, just a regular hard line, where we can call in and say, this is so-and-so from the FBI, I need to talk to you, who's in charge in there? Usually that's the way we begin. If there's no telephone, we'll try a bullhorn. I've done it in so many different ways. And hey, ultimately we'll say, hey, we've got a telephone out here that we can throw in there to you, and then it'll be private conversations between you and me. More often than not, believe it or not, they will accept that telephone, which we call the hostage rescue phone. And we'll throw one end in there, and then we'll have the other end over here, and we establish communications that way. The communication usually, and this has been my personal experience, you've got the on-scene commander who is the overall commander. He is the person that makes the final decisions. The tactical commander, of course, who is in charge of the HRT, will come to him. The hostage negotiations leader, if you will, or team leader, will come to him. And in that setting, the three of us will talk. Yes, there is constant communication. When it is a protracted situation, by protracted I mean it goes for 1 or more days. More often than not, the HRT will have one of their members with the negotiators in their setting, listening to everything that's going on, and also the negotiators are able to, if they need something from the HRT, are able to talk to that HRT member immediately and say, can the team do this for us, because it would be tactically advantageous for our negotiations. And we've got him right there. And he understands, and he has gone to our school. So he is a trained negotiator also, but he is a member of the tactical team. And it works perfectly. When negotiations have broken down completely, and we have to come to the tactical team and say, hey, look, we're not going to be able to talk this guy out. How much time do you need to prepare to assault the site? In one particular case where I was involved in such a situation, said we need 7 days, because it was a fortified place that needed to be breached with explosives. It wasn't that they could just kick down the door. So they needed 7 days to practice. And for 7 days then, we went back as negotiators and we talked and talked and talked and talked and bought time for 7 additional days until the HRT was ready to go in. At the end of those 7 days, they made their assault. It went down like clockwork. And not one person was hurt. I can't give you a pat answer that will generalize, or that you can generalize to all situations and say, when you see these particular traits, if you will, then you know that you can't continue negotiating, or negotiations are not going to work. However, there are, within that realm of possibilities, one of them that comes to mind immediately is, let's say, when a hostage taker or a group of hostage takers make such demands that are so outlandish, that are so far above and beyond what you as a negotiator or your organization, be it police, FBI, or the US government in general, can provide to them. And not only that they are outlandish, but that they continue to demand them and don't back off from them. Then you know that you've got a problem, that more than likely you're not going to be able to solve this problem via negotiations. An example that comes to mind immediately is back in 1991, we were at the Federal Correctional Facility in Talladega, Alabama. We had approximately 125 Cubans who were going to be deported to Cuba after they had exhausted all their immigration hearings. And of course, when they found out they were going to be sent back, they immediately took hostages, took about 11 hostages. So now we've got a setting, 125 hostage takers, 10 to 11 hostages with them, and their demands, among others, were that the Congress of the United States, and this was in August, that the Congress of the United States get together in an emergency session and pass a law exclusively for them to keep the INS from sending them back to Cuba. Now that is about outlandish and ridiculous a demand as I've ever heard. Who can get Congress to come together in an emergency session for a specific thing like that? I don't think anyone can. The reason why negotiations work basically is that when the hostage takers have demands, more often than not, the negotiator can work off those demands and bring them down, get them to back off. And in other words, if they wanted 4 chairs in this room, by the time a good negotiation is over, maybe you've got them talked down to 1 chair. But if throughout the entire process they insist that it's got to be 4 chairs, there's no negotiation, it's not going to work. The worst possible situation is to be in the middle of a negotiation, to believe as a negotiator that things are going well. Everything's calm, everything's relaxed. They are at a point where you want them to be. Everybody's talking to each other. And suddenly, out of the blue, someone dies, especially a hostage. We're talking about just someone turning around and killing a hostage. Whether it was the hostage's own doing or not is beside the point. The point is, at that moment in time, things really start to unravel extremely quickly. You have a death or at least a serious assault in there. Now your on-scene commanders for whom you are working for as a negotiator are beginning to ask the question, is this not working? Is it time for a tactical team to go in and put an end to this?
The Army has a counter-terrorist mission, and they have a very extensive counter-terrorist mission, and I guess To answer your question, yes. That's about all I need to say on that. I think of terrorist as just a generic term. In most cases, we actually identify who it is we're talking about. If it's a Middle Eastern, European, Central, South American extremist group of, any race, creed, political opinion, we actually try to identify the group. Terrorist is just more or less an adjective that we used to describe training, operations, and types of targets. So I haven't ever really looked at it as anything more than that, more than just an adjective. It's just a descriptive term, and usually if you're going to go do a mission, conduct a mission, and some type of operation against a group, you're going to know the group's name, what their political gain or religious gain, and how they operate, and of course hopefully how they're equipped. What were our roles? Well, first of all, the tasks, the assignments are endless. You could be deployed anywhere doing anything from what you see on TV, what people imagine, to just making sure vehicles run. I mean, the task could be anywhere from very exciting to very mundane. What mundane would be your 11 Bravo infantry soldier in a foxhole or in an LPOP, sitting in a specific area on a specific piece of terrain, watching the terrain to his front, looking for enemy. I mean, that's 11 Bravo infantry person. That's about the most mundane, and you could find yourself doing that, whatever the mission calls for, all the way up to haloing in from 25,000 feet at night with either yourself or just a few other guys to locate a target that in a completely covert environment, to either take some pictures or do some other type of business, and then exfil through some type of underground network to get yourself out of the country, come back, deliver what type of information you were sent in to get, and then go on to the next mission. They work in smaller units. They're together for a lot longer time. They get more money. They have more money to train. You retain your people longer, so you don't have the turnover rate that you do in your normal infantry ground units. So the people get to know each other quick. They get to know each other more and better and in more depth. And I know what you're going to do, and you know what he's going to do, and we're able to react in that type of environment. To become proficient takes a lot more time than most people think. It's not going out and buying a box of ammunition, buying a gun and a box of ammunition, and trying to line the sights up and shoot the target, shoot what you're aiming at. To become what we consider operationally proficient takes at least a minimum of 4 to 6 months, and intensive range time with professional instructors teaching, not just out there floundering around on your own, but actual instructions, and to put anywhere from 10 to 20,000 rounds downrange per weapon system. Now you can be familiar with all the others, how they work, and a lot of things transfer over, but when we talk real surgical type shooting, very, very demanding accuracy, you need to concentrate on one to 3 type weapon systems. Most people, especially special ops type personnel, would like to say they're a weapons expert in everything that was ever made, and the reality of that is that's not going to happen. You can be familiar with every weapon that's made, military weapon and other, but to become truly proficient to where you're willing to go out and take on the responsibilities and the tasks of a mission, you need to practice and become very proficient with 1 to maybe 3 types of weapons. And when I say 1 to 3, usually I'm talking some type of handgun, some type of rifle, assault type rifle, and then possibly a subgun or a sniper rifle, depending on which role you've been slotted to play. The hardest thing to shoot is a handgun. Some of the rifle shooters would like to tell you the opposite, but the hardest thing to shoot and hit what you're aiming at is a handgun. The sight radius is short. It's the least stable platform because you're holding, your whole gun out here versus all tucked in and with a longer sight radius. The things that the shooters do in those types of lethal weapon, Arnold Schwarzenegger's action movies, any of them, you pick them, all of them. First of all, I don't expect Hollywood actors to be good shooters, although some of them are, shooting enthusiasts, and they definitely work at it, but they're not shooting professionals, so there's no way that they could ever achieve what a professional shooter who spends almost every day on the range training for what it is, he does to compete and win. But Hollywood in general portrays shooting, and I think they use the mentality, what does the audience want to see? They want to see some guy who can pull off the phenomenal, the extraordinary with a gun, whether it be a rifle, Quigley Down Under, or a handgun, Mel Gibson, Lethal Weapon, doing a little smiley face on his target. They're trying to cater and deliver to the public what they think the public wants to see, and so they've gone to, they one up each other. So it's gotten almost to the point to where they've got the Hollywood shooters doing things that really aren't even achievable. Some of it is, some of it isn't. The problems with the visible laser sights is that if you get too many people together with those same sights on their guns in one location, it becomes a ball of string that you're trying to untangle and figure out whose sight is whose sight belongs to this gun. And it gets to the point sometimes, because I've actually tried that, to where you have to bring your gun, whether it's a pistol or some type of a rifle, and bring it back and point it at the floor to find your dot, and then bring it back and orient it on your target again, just to be sure that that's your dot before you pull the trigger, which is a nice thing to know. I've never really had much use for the laser type sights, except in some applications where you're designating targets. If you're controlling fire and you're designating targets to other people who may not be right next to you and who can see what you're trying to designate. If you were over there and I was saying, shoot that target, and you're going, which one? The one I have my dot on. Oh, that target. Then I use it in that aspect. Or if you're trying to designate for people in the air to see down, which there's applications for that. But as far as close quarter battle, if you will, it just gets very confusing when you see all these different lasers or dots running around the room.
We adapted to room entry techniques, to clearing linear targets, to doing stairwells. We found that the faster we moved, the more explosive we moved, and with surprise we were able to achieve better results that way than any other way we had come upon. So we started calling them dynamic and explosive room entry techniques. Once we had targets within a room and we come in and we did the explosive entry, whatever method we used, whether it was snaking in or whether it was a high man, low man crisscross method, whatever one we used, we found out that the faster we got into the room, the faster all guns came into play. Once we got into the room, we realized that people are all over the place, so we had to get what we call zones of fire. Each man was assigned a particular zone of fire, and if you had a 4-man room entry technique, every part of that room had to be covered, and it had to be covered in about a second and a half at the most. Because at close quarters, action is faster than reaction. It takes time for the brain to process the information and for the signal to go down to react. If you're clear in a room, if you get into a room in under a second, that reaction time is just, it's gone. Once you beat the door down and you go into the room in an explosive manner, if the hostage or whoever else is in the third room back, then it becomes very dangerous. But you got to keep moving. Once it starts, the action keeps going until the mission is accomplished. And of course, the longer it takes, the more dangerous it is, both for the hostage and for the entry team, because now they know you're in there. So we decided that at that time, well, there's got to be a better way of doing this, because it's going to take us time to get back to that 4th or 5th room. So we come up with the idea of multiple room entries, where we'd use 2 teams. One team would come in from one side and the other team would come from the other side, which presented another host of problems, such as crossfire and stuff like this, okay? So then we had to develop no pass, no fire lines of debarkation, you know, who would do what in the room. Then, of course, the inter-team communications became very critical. You know what I'm saying? And it was absolutely mandatory that the communications was first class, okay, between the 2 teams that were going into the building. And that's pretty much how that developed. And then I think somewhere around 1975 or 76, I'm not quite sure, some people from Fort Bragg, North Carolina came over. They were going to visit with the Berlin SCK, the GSG-9, and the SAS, and of course they came to our location, and we were a classified unit operating out of Western Europe at the time, and they took all the material that we had and our allies had, and they put it together. They went back to Fort Bragg, and I believe in 1977 they formed Delta Force at Fort Bragg, and I think probably a lot of their material came from the things that we had done working with our allies in Western Europe at the time. So we had a hand in the beginning of it. Although we were never assigned to Delta, we did have some part in bringing it about. You all know about the Munich, the Olympic massacre and stuff like that. That was a classical textbook example of what not to do. They had a situation that was contained, and they made a fatal error of allowing it to become mobile. Once you have them contained, you never allow them to become mobile. Once they became mobile, many more options were available to them, and they utilized them, and we all saw the end result of it. And I think probably that woke a lot of people up, and they realized that this was the coming thing. You had the Baader-Meinhof gang, you had the Rosa Brigada, you had the Japanese Liberation Front, you had transnational terrorist groups that were operating in and out of Europe, the Middle East. They were supporting each other. They were better organized than the Western countries were to go against them. Okay? They had the funds, they had the training areas, the training sites in East Germany at the time, Libya, Iran, and a few other places. Okay? And once that thing happened, I believe it was at Fürstenfeldbruck where it finally took place, they realized that they really had to come up with some cohesive curriculum that everybody could go to. When we first started doing this, I can remember, I think it was back around 1974, somewhere around there, when we finally got to the point where we were going to start training for this type of incidents, we found out that there was nothing out there. Nothing. We worked with our German counterparts and our British counterparts, and we started developing techniques. And I can remember we had this area that was given to us where we could go train, and we did it the hard way. We started, well, if we have to approach a building, how do we do it? You know, how do we get inside the building? Once we're inside the building, what do we do? How do we go into these rooms? How do we clear a room? Multiple target transition. How do we do threat prioritizing? A whole host of things that nobody had any idea about. So we started doing it, and we saw what worked and what didn't work. And we come down to the realization that we could take our military training and adapt it to an urban environment. And the one that we picked was the raid, and the raid consisting of speed, surprise, and violence of action. What we found that through a consensus of the people that were involved in the training, it all boiled, the best technique, as you're asking me, was the best way to do this was the most explosive and technique that you can come up with. In other words, not only did you have to have overwhelming force, but you had to have the appearance of superior force when you went into the room. Many times when you went into a situation and you went in with overwhelming force, it saved lives because people gave up quickly. They realized what they were up against. You were in there so fast, in their face so fast, that they realized, you know, hey, this is it. Some of the skills that we have, that we acquire over the years, and the experience that we have, the experiences and the things we learn from them, some of them are perishable. In other words, as time goes by, the less you engage in this kind of activity, the less sharp you are with it. So I think it all has to do with training, and training with the same people that you're going to go on the missions with. I don't mean training with other people here and there. I mean with a team, no matter how big it may be or how small it may be. But this group of individuals always training together, to where you know every small thing that happens. You understand the people you're with. You understand what the reaction is going to be to certain situations, or immediate action drills that we call them. When something happens, how do we react to them? Okay, it's almost instinctive. It doesn't even take a verbal command. People are already moving. For example, like an ambush. You find yourself trapped in an ambush. There's only one option, and everybody knows it, and that's to go through the ambush. You can't turn and run, because the ambush site or the kill zone is a death trap. There's no way out of it if it's a well-laid ambush. You only have one option, and that's to assault and go through it. Okay? So these things are automatic over a period of time. But the less you train and the less money is available for training, the less proficient you become in those particular activities. So you have to have the training. We used to shoot every week. We used to practice immediate action drills. We practice this, we practice that. We practice martial arts, you know, disarm techniques, whatever it may be. But we constantly practice. And when we became proficient at it, we didn't stop training. We kept doing it over and over again. We'd invent some sort of scenario. We had to put all our skills together and go in and accomplish a mission. So it was a constant rotation of scenarios to keep us up at a certain peak. He has to be on top of it. He has to control the information that comes into the team. In other words, everything that gathered, all the intelligence that's gathered, should be processed through him and filtered down to his team through him. There should be no end runs done on this guy. He should be the sole man that receives the information and processes the information. He should be the one that determines the quality of the information, the importance of the information. He's the one that should determine who should get the information and how it's going to be used. Okay? He asks questions, and he allows opinions, and he allows different factors to come into play, but essentially, you know, he's the commander, and he's the one that has the answer to everything. He's the one who should be charged of that. And I think another quality of a good leader is one who constantly trains his team, who is constantly aware that whatever is available in training, that he should seek it out and use it, whatever it is. No matter how trivial it may seem to somebody, one day it may come into play, you don't know. Then the mindset is everybody falls right into line. There's no dissension whatsoever, because we know once the go signal is given and we actually go, there can't be any dissension out there. And everybody has to be of like mind. Everybody has to be mission oriented, as well as looking out for the guy that's going with you. And what I'm saying is that when you go on a mission, you should never be in a position where you feel that you have to look over your shoulder to see if somebody's there. You have to have the confidence that no matter what happens and where you go, that you don't have to look over your shoulder because you know he is there. So I think it's more of a real tight, close-knit brotherhood. You know, you're all in the same boat, and if, you know, instead of jumping out of the boat and swimming away, everybody grabs a bucket and starts bailing the water out so you can stay afloat. So nobody leaves anybody behind, at least not in any of the organizations I've ever been in. It was all for everybody. Was for everybody. We stuck together for the good or the bad. We sunk with a ship or we floated away, one or the other. So I think the mindset To me, what it finally breaks down to is trust. Say we're on an operation somewhere and we came under fire, for example, and we had to call for an extraction helicopter. And we knew the LZ, the landing zone, was going to be a hot LZ, but we had to get out. And say that we all raced for the helicopter, and we were getting on a helicopter, and the helicopter started to take off. And what follows is my definition of trust. One man falls off and goes back to the ground, falls on the ground. This is my statement of trust. Everybody gets out of the helicopter. And I know if I'm the guy that falls on the ground, that they're going to come out of that helicopter and get on the ground with me. That's trust. I have no doubt. We went up a stairwell, which was relatively easy. We didn't encounter any resistance. We got to the door. They moved down the wall. We already knew the layout of the building and the rooms. They placed an explosive charge on the wall. The team lined up outside the door. They blew the explosives off. The wall caved in. We went through the door. They rammed the door. We went right in behind the door. The people that were in the first room were completely disoriented. But when they made their entry, I was coming, I was number 5 man. I looked, I could see them run into other rooms. They were staggering and stuff like that, but they were going into the other rooms. They cleared the first room, no problem. They went into the second room, because once they start, they don't stop. It was very explosive. It took us about a second to get into the room, and by second number 2, we were going into the second room. It was that fast. Get into the second room, again, no problem. When they hit the third room, the shooting started. 2 men were killed, 2 of the bad guys were killed, 1 of the officers was wounded, but it was so overwhelming, and they wounded two more of the bad guys, and 1 guy just gave up. So it was, I think the whole thing took approximately 30 seconds. I think there's always going to be groups out there that have a cause that they're going to fight for. You see it even today in Western countries, Ireland, up in Belfast. I think a lot of it is tribal in nature. In Africa, different tribes. They just, I think, and you've seen it in Yugoslavia, where when they were under the iron hammer of the Russians, the Soviet Union, it was contained because they knew that the Soviet Union wouldn't put up with that kind of action. But once the Soviet Union dissipated, all those things that have been dormant for 75 years rose right to the surface. And it didn't take very long either. So they reverted right back to the old things that they did for centuries and centuries and centuries. So I don't see how, myself personally, how you can stop this kind of a thing, because those things are always there. And as long as they're there, and the human beings are human beings, and the differences of the thought processes are different, you know, and I think we're always going to have this clashing of people, and you're going to see it. And if they can't get it done through negotiations, they're going to resort to something else, and that something else is what we call terrorism. Well, I think it's more ideological than it is anything else. I think people are taken from a young age, are in a structured system that doesn't allow them any freedom of thought or movement, and they're inculcated with all kinds of ideological factors that play on their minds when they're real young, and I think they groom these people, and as they grow older, they're sort of what we call one street people, one way. There's no two-way streets on them, they're just one way, and that's the only way. And I think they do such a good job to the point where they'll put the explosives on themselves and walk into a marketplace and blow themselves up. And I think it's almost impossible to defend against that kind of an action. If someone is not worried about the consequences of his actions, then you have a very difficult time trying to defend against it, because he's not worried about whether he dies or not. Most terrorist groups do not want to do a toe-to-toe battle with anybody. They want to come in, they pick their most vulnerable target, and they go for it. When the Rosa Brigada I believe it was in Rose Brigada, got General Dozier. He wasn't the primary target. He was the more vulnerable target. They checked the first target out, who I can't remember who it was, but they opted for the second target, which was the vulnerable target. Okay? They don't go for the well-protected and the really disciplined bodyguards that are around somebody because they're going to pay a heavy price for it. They always look for their vulnerable one. They go for the weaker prey. And so I think the mindset of the terrorists, and I don't think it's, they go for the short-term impact. You know what I'm saying? They don't go for something that'll start a war. They go for something that'll create an impact in the public mind about what's going on in the world. In other words, they want to get into the papers. So they go out and they blow up a building, they blow up a school bus or something like that. And if you think about it for a minute and you look at some of the acts like the Loud Airport incident and stuff like that, and the things they've done, they're quite cowardly. In other words, they pick innocent people. And they're always the victims, and the collateral damages are always the innocent one in a terrorist incident. I think it makes communications between them quite simple. I think that if you have a certain system of communicating, some form of encryption system that you can pass over the internet, yes, I think it's very, very effective. You could have agents in all countries in the world and communicate with them right over the internet by email. You know what I'm saying? And depending on how the terms are couched and what words are used, you know, and whatever system they use for encoding or decoding, it's quite effective and it's immediate. Yes, I think it's. I think it facilitates what they're doing. I can tell you from experience that if you have an effective encryption system, it's almost impossible to break. If you're going to be involved in tactical operations of any nature, the less people that know what you're doing, the better off you are. The more the information is disseminated, the more likely of a chance that something can go awry. So I think encryption systems are extremely important. And I think a lot of corporations use encryption systems now to pass their information back and forth because there's such a thing as industrial sabotage and things like that. So to prevent that, they go to the encoding systems, and some of them are quite effective, especially the encoding systems that use what we call random nulls or one-time encryption systems that are used once and never used again. It's almost impossible to break. Of course, there's other systems that are below that are effective for short periods of time, but with a lot of computer time, eventually they can be broken. So they're only good for short-term operations and not long-term operations, whereas the one-time generated systems are good for however long, because they're only used once and they're destroyed and never used again, so it's almost impossible to break them. Well, false flag recruitment is a method that people use. Say, for example, I'm an Israeli, okay, or I'm from a country that's hostile to Israel, and you're an Israeli that's living in the United States, we'll say, or some other country, and you are in a position where you're exposed to sensitive information, and I approach you, and I say, look, you know, I'm a federal brother, you know what I mean, I'm a fellow Israeli, you know, we need information, you're in a position for information, we would really like you to work for us. And then I recruit you, you start providing information to me, thinking it's going to Israel, but in fact it's going somewhere else. It's what's called false flag recruitment. I've got you working for me, thinking that you're working for your own country, and in fact you're not. Well, this is only personal opinion again, but I'm pretty impressed with the British SAS. And I think what impressed me is when they had the Iranian situation, not only did they rehearse well, but the government entities that were involved also rehearsed with them. In other words, they didn't sit up on high and just call down and say, do this. They got involved in it and they rehearsed with these government entities. And of course, it went off quite well. I mean, they had access to the top people who made the instant decisions, you know what I mean? And boom, it was executed perfectly. So I'd probably say that the British have a lot of experience with this thing. There's a lot of brain power over there to come up with this CQB system, which is an excellent system. I've never seen any better, and all I've seen about it is other people adapting it. Okay, so I would say, although the Americans and the Germans and the Italians, and don't misunderstand me, they're all good in what they do. But I think if you want to go back to the beginning, you know, who really put a lot of emphasis onto this thing, I would say it was the SAS. I don't know if you remember a while back where they had that Russian general was on TV and he admitted that they had been missing somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 small-size nuke weapons. They're called SATM devices, Special Atomic Demolition Munitions. They're easily carried. I used to jump out of planes with them. I used to carry them in my rucksack, so I know what they can do. Whether they made their way into the United States is debatable or not. I think since then they pretty much haven't talked about it, but my personal feeling is that they're out there somewhere. I think the future, because of these types of weapons and the availability of them and the portability of them, I think we're going to have a serious problem with it. I'm not in the least bit worried about biological or chemical weapons. I'm worried about nuclear weapons.
Military information usually falls into two areas, classified and unclassified. Unclassified information is what we call open source material. It's available in books, libraries, the internet, it's in history books, etc. It's unclassified. Classified military information falls into the reason that we would have to classify military information is to protect U.S. forces during combat operations or in training and peacetime operations. Basically, the information would fall into four areas: FOUO, for official use only, confidential, secret, and top secret. Additionally, for very important aspects of U.S. national security, there are additional things called top secret code word. For official use only, an example of that would be official documents, planning documents, rosters of key personnel, phone numbers, email addresses on a classified system. The information itself is not classified, but what you could do with it could lead there. Confidential material is information that we don't want to get to any of our adversaries or potential adversaries. Secret information is more important information that its loss could degrade our ability to command and control forces to conduct military operations. Top secret information is that most sensitive information that the disclosure to the public, to adversaries, potential adversaries, could have a significant negative impact on our ability to conduct operations. Most governments around the world have military forces that are capable of conducting special operations, specialized surgical, counter-terrorist missions. It provides a better opportunity for those forces to have a greater than average chance of success if they have the more operations security, the more cover. If they're more classified than open, it makes it a lot easier. The best example is this: if Babe Ruth goes to the plate, points over the right field fence, everyone knows he's going to swing and hit a home run over the right field fence. If he doesn't do that, if he swings and hits a triple down the left field line, he's failed. It's the same way in special operations. We've got to have a certain degree of operations security that classification helps us maintain in order to be successful. If the terrorists know we're coming for them, the chances of us succeeding are greatly diminished, resulting in mission failure or the loss of friendly personnel.
When I was discussing Rainbow Six with a friend of mine who's formerly a senior official in the FBI, he remarked to me that he'd made a proposal to the U.S. government some years earlier that a multinational organization like Rainbow should be established to deal with that particular threat. And he also suggested it be based in Britain because it's easy, because of the way British Airways is organized. It's the easiest place in the world to get into and out of very rapidly. And also the Brits with the Special Air Service at Hereford in Wales have the best counter-terrorist operation in the whole world because they get the most work and they have the most experience. So we want to draw upon that. So is such a thing possible? Yes. It hasn't happened yet. I really don't know why, except maybe the international terrorist threat just isn't as bad as people like me make it into. You prevent people from doing things by letting them know that if they do them, something really bad will happen to them as a result. Terrorism is in some manifestations it's crime, in other manifestations a form of low-intensity warfare. When it becomes a matter of low-intensity warfare, that means a nation-state can really turn the dogs of war loose. And it's a good idea for terrorists to know that if they do bad things, they're going to get bit, and it hurts to get bitten. Your first line of defense against terrorism is good intelligence. And so if you want to develop a really capable counter-terrorist capability, what you have to develop is an organization like CIA or National Security Agency, somebody who can gather the information you need so you can prevent the incidents from happening in the first place. If it just means knocking on their door and saying, don't go to Switzerland today because if you go there, somebody's going to be waiting for you. That's a successful counter-terrorist operation. You don't have to kill people to be successful. Success means it doesn't happen. That means gathering the information to let people know that if they start, something bad is going to happen to them, maybe they shouldn't do it. Deterrence means that a guy thinks twice before doing something for fear of getting hurt. I've been down to Quantico with the FBI hostage rescue team, and I would not want those guys shooting at me because they are very, very good at what they do. I mean, what Jack Nicholas does with a 5-iron, these guys do with firearms. They fire 500 rounds a week each to practice to stay current. They're very, very scary people if you're a bad guy. If you're a good guy, it's nice to know they're around. In Britain, they have the SAS. They're probably the best in the world because they get the most work. And you don't want people like this chasing after you because you're going to get hurt if it happens. Well, the problem with non-lethal weapons, although it's nice to be able to neutralize somebody without killing them, is, from a technical point of view, the human body is a very hardy organism, and to incapacitate a human being rapidly without doing really serious physical harm to him is a very difficult goal to accomplish. I mean, there are ways that there's one weapon, you can use a very bright light, for example, to blind a guy, but most people would rather be dead than be blinded, permanently blinded. There is such technology out there. Its applications, or the utility of such a device, is very scenario specific. If you've got a guy standing in the middle of a parking lot all by himself, that's one thing. If a fellow's in a daycare center with a bunch of little kids, that's something else. So I don't think we're not going to get away from lethal weapons for the simple reason that some people can only be turned off by a bullet in the head. Well, I mean, the most theatrical part of counterterrorism operations are the guys with the guns, but they're not the important ones. It's the guys with the ears who are the important ones, because you can be the most dangerous person with a gun in the world since Davy Crockett, but if you're not in the right place and you don't know who to shoot at, you're not going to accomplish very much. So the most important people in the whole organization are the ones who gather the information. That's done with espionage agents in the field. It's done with electronic surveillance and electronic espionage measures like is done by the National Security Agency at Fort Meade. It's done in many different ways, but the most important guys are the guys who gather the information. Every time I download something on my computer, I worry if there's going to be a virus and it's going to make my computer crash, and which means my publisher doesn't get this when they might want it. It's an annoyance. As I was saying earlier today, 15 years ago, there was this country called the Soviet Union that had on the order of 15,000 nuclear warheads on ballistic launchers pointed at this country. They're not around anymore. Okay, so to worry about cyber terrorism, all this other stuff, it's like worrying about a mosquito when you just killed a vampire bat. And all cyber terrorism, all forms of terrorism really are just a buzzing mosquito in a world that used to be replete with vampire bats. The bats are gone. And everybody's saying, oh my God, there's a mosquito. Well, a mosquito's an annoyance. It's not a deadly threat. You know what the Japanese proved in Tokyo when that lunatic group released chemical weapons was that chemical weapons are actually very inefficient. They're nowhere near as efficient, for example, as explosive devices. Chemical weapons and biological weapons are psychological rather than physical weapons. They frighten people rather than kill them. In that sense, they're very efficient. But in terms of doing actual damage to a society, they're not terribly efficient. So is that a threat we have to take seriously? Yes, certainly it is. But I'd worry more about, for example, nuclear terrorism. I worry more about some lunatic getting a nuclear device into America than somebody bringing a bucket full of gas and then probably spilling it on himself and killing himself as a result. Chemical and biological weapons are, by their very nature, extremely inefficient. And it's the efficient weapons you worry about, not the inefficient ones. We worry about nuclear weapons in the wrong hands. That's a big scare, because even a small nuclear weapon will take a big bite out of any city in the world. But I see no signs that that's a real problem. I mean, countries take very good care to safeguard their nuclear devices for the obvious reasons. They're dangerous things, and if an American one is stolen, our first thought is somebody's going to set it off here. If a Russian one is stolen, the Russians are going to be concerned it's going to be set off in Moscow or St. Petersburg or Volgograd or something, one of their major cities. For that reason, they safeguard those weapons very carefully. I don't see. There have been various movies and TV shows done about this possibility. I don't really see that anybody's in a real panic about it as yet, and until I see that panic, I'm not going to worry about it. Problem with using the military in counter-terrorist operations, first of all, if it's domestic, it runs contrary to U.S. law. And there's a law that comes out of Reconstruction, post the American Civil War, called posse comitatus, and that means the military cannot perform police functions without having the president sign off on it first. So ordinarily, no, you wouldn't expect that. It would take a rather extraordinary set of circumstances to turn Delta loose within the United States. What Delta is for really is for counter-terrorist operations outside the United States. Now, if you regard terrorism as a form of low-intensity warfare, if it's sponsored by another state or a quasi-state organization outside our borders, yes, Delta Force could get involved in that. But that hasn't happened yet, and I don't really think it's going to happen anytime soon. Nobody projects power around the world as well as the United States of America. If they know where you are, they can come get you. And we can come get you better than anybody else in the world. According to James Adams, who's the London Times, a pretty good reporter, a guy who knows international security affairs very, very well, he says the American FBI has been the most successful counter-terrorist agency in the world for the simple reason we haven't had a major counter-terrorist or a major terrorist operation in America. I mean, you have Timothy McVeigh blowing up Oklahoma and all that, but he was one lunatic, and it's kind of hard to defend yourself against a single lunatic. So far, we've done fairly well. Part of that's been luck. Part of that's been the fact we got this 3,000 miles of water on both sides of our country to protect us against people. But also, the FBI has been a very efficient law enforcement agency, and of course, we treat terrorism not as a political or not as warfare, but as a kind of crime. And the FBI is a pretty good police force. The problem is not going to go away, and sooner or later the bad guys are going to get lucky. But so far, I think America's done fairly well, and will probably continue to do well because we had good people, out there working for us on a day-to-day basis.
Okay. Quiet on the set.
How good of a zoom is that on there?
Pretty darn good. Action.
To defend themselves against acts of war. Oops.
They're usually midterm to senior people. They're not. That's nice.
That's okay.
You always want to hold on to the pin after you pull it out. That's a bad boy, man.
The gun's real friendly. It'll come back and meet you.
Wow. Incorporates a vertical foregrip and cut.
Whoa. Nice.
are faced with less information in resolving it, and it's a good question.
You don't have to shoot the whole mag if you don't want.
Oh, I want. All right. Jesus Christ! Holy cow!
Are you a good Rainbow Six player?
I'm a Rainbow Six player. I don't know how good I am. I've lost too many team members, I'll tell you that.
All right.
Rock and roll, John. Look for this to be a very popular weapon in the future, very reliable, and it's quality from HK.
And you can kind of
Turn that off a minute.
The group Rainbow originated with Tom. As I said, initially when we were coming up with our ideas for the game, we were thinking about the FBI HRT, and then we changed the name of the game internally. We're going to call it Black Ops, and it was going to be this, some black covert operations group, but we didn't actually have a name for it. And then when Tom said, well, I'm writing a book, and it's called Rainbow Six, and the team's name is Rainbow, we're like, oh, okay, I guess the team's name is Rainbow. Right, all right, we'll go with that. In the book, Tom also sort of deviates from reality in terms of team size and in terms of situations. I think that one of the things, we also want to stay true to the spirit of Clancy, and part of what Tom does is he gives you a filtered version of the real world. He gives you sort of the real world pumped up and made a little more interesting and a little more vivid. And I think that he's doing sort of the same thing that we were doing with the game. That, yeah, if he did a book where he had, a 100-person hostage rescue team, that would technically be more accurate, but it would make it hard to get into inside the individual heads of the team members, and it would be hard to pump up the drama of the situation. So that you might have something that was, a drier rendition of the actual events, but that didn't capture the drama of actually being there. And so part of our motivation is that, Clancy books are fun. Clancy books are not like reading manuals on how terrorism, or counterterrorism, or military operations are carried out. They're entertainment, and we wanted to be something that would have the same level of factual background, but presented in an entertaining fashion to be true to the franchise. We decided very early on in the process that we weren't going to make a simulation, that we were going to make something that felt as realistic as possible, but if there was ever a question of whether we would err on the side of fun or err on the side of realism, we would always err on the side of fun. We tried to be really clear to ourselves when we were deviating from reality, so we tried to know what the reality was we were deviating from. So we wanted people to move as realistically as possible. We wanted the amount of terrain you could cover in a given amount of time to be as realistic as possible. We wanted the capabilities of the different weapons to be as realistic as possible. But at the same time, there are all sorts of concessions we knowingly made to make it more fun. Most of the weapons have much shorter ranges than they do in real life, just because it's no fun to pick off a tiny little bunch of pixels off in the distance. So we tend to shorten engagement ranges from what they should be in real life. For a typical hostage rescue operation in the real world, you send in 40, 50, 100 guys all at once to take out a group of terrorists. Whereas that might be interesting to watch, we realized there was no way the player could control a 40 or 100 person team. And it would also, there's no way we technically could put 100 different team members running on the screen at once in 3D. So we attempted at every turn to sort of capture the flavor of what was going on and capture the spirit of what was going on without being literally true to the facts of how hostage rescue actually occurs. The game didn't change much from its initial treatment to the final version we delivered. It wasn't so much that we were trying to do that, it's that we were not trying not to. One of the things we did wrong in the development of Rainbow Six is that we did not do proper design documentation. We didn't design the game as much as we should have, and it was a credit to the professionalism of a lot of the members of the team that they were able to keep things in focus without all the design documentation there. But to some extent, one reason I think we stayed so focused on the original concept is that the only design doc we had for a large period of the game was the original treatment. And so if there's any question, is this in the game, is this not in the game, there was one 4-page document that spelled out what the game was supposed to be, and everybody kept referring back to that as the direction we're supposed to follow. And so we didn't have the opportunity to sort of go off on wild tangents because we never took the time to do the design to do it.
On Rogue Spear, at least, Gary and Greg Stelmack did an excellent job coming up with a formula based upon the physical characteristics of the weapons that allowed us to get all of our characteristics out and tweak them from there. So we did things like, what's the overall length of the weapon? What's the length of the barrel? What's the caliber of the round? What is the what's the effective kick of the weapon because of the powder load? What's the rate of fire? We put all of these things. What's the weight of the gun? We put all of these things into a formula, and Greg sat there and tweaked and tweaked and tweaked and tweaked, and out of that we got all of our reticle constants and things like that affect things in the game, which was great. And then we played around with that, with those variables until we got something that played well, or was close, and then we play tested it ourselves and said, oh, even though the formulas are pumping out this, we want this, it doesn't feel like there's enough of a difference with this weapon. So that's basically how we did it. We agonized over a lot of design decisions in Rainbow Six. We agonized over the fact that we had this complicated planning phase followed by the action phase, which no one had done before. We agonized over the fact that we weren't going to have any power-ups, that it was realistic combat where you could be killed with one shot. No one had done that before, and we weren't sure that any of that was going to be fun. We thought it would be. We did tests actually using the Quake engine. We mocked up, we made like a little Rainbow Six Quake mod, and we played that a bunch multiplayer, and that was a lot of fun, but then again, we weren't sure how the final game would be accepted. The first real sign that we had something truly kind of magical on our hands was E3 of '98, it must have been. When we showed up at E3, we had crammed everything in there like crazy to get it all working at its most basic level. And we had 2 levels that we could play. We had the Congo and the Embassy. And over the course of the 3 days of E3, we had constantly like huge crowds. We had people coming back and back and back, and we'd have people come through once, and then they'd go away and come back with more friends, and then they'd come back with their bosses in suits, and then and it became kind of like it was really rejuvenating, and we came away from that saying that we have a great product, and yeah, it's going to do great if people get access to it, if they can hear about it.
The team that did Rainbow Six was very, very young. I mean, we were all relatively new to the industry. Some of the members had worked on SSN, but I don't think we had any first-person shooter experience, indoor experience. We had a lot of rendering experience, we had some software engineering, but nobody had actually done this type of project before. So it was very definitely a learning experience. While it worked very, very well, we found that what we ended up with was not easy to extend, was not easy to go add features to. Rogue Spear probably took longer to do than it should have, simply because of some of the early design choices we made because we didn't know any better. So if we went back and did it again, there's a lot of re-architecting at a low level. We'd bring in some pieces. For example, we'd probably continue a lot of the gun combat model we've got now, do some of the refinements we talked about earlier to it. We like bits of our AI, although there's a lot more to do. We kind of have a base navigation layer that's working pretty well. Now we'd like to work a lot more on their tactics. Those sorts of things, that they're pieces we bring over, but the architecture that holds them all together we would really love a chance to come back in and completely rework and rewrite so that it would be much easier to add these things to in the future, to fix things, to extend, to do different types of gameplay with, etc. Balancing gameplay and realism is very, very tricky because, well, number one, there's not just balancing those two, there's also game performance. So a lot of times you have to take a shortcut simply because the processor can't do the types of calculations that you really need to do it in real life. But the other thing is that a lot of things that are part of a simulation like this aren't actually any fun in a game. For example, we've exaggerated the attributes of some of the weapons a little bit simply because, well, an M16 and a M4 carbine have very, very similar real-world characteristics. There's just not that much difference. So you have to differentiate them in the game in ways that they're not differentiated in real life, just to make it more fun, make it more interesting. The other thing is that a lot of times, like, I mean, we simulate combat. If you talk to people that have been in combat, they'll tell you that it's hours and hours of boredom punctuated by a few seconds of sheer terror. So in a game, people don't want hours and hours of boredom, so you have to compress lots of other things into it. They want their skills to match the skills that they think these guys have as opposed to their real life skills. So you make players a little more accurate in the game, things along those lines, to just try to make it more fun, cut out some of the boring stuff in real life, and make the game stuff more fun. We came up with a reticle system that basically expands and shrinks to kind of show the cone of fire you'd have if you shot with it at that time. And we do things like the accuracy of the weapon tends to make that cone much smaller, so it's going to be much more accurate with where you're shooting, while we then do a shrink time of that reticle to simulate the disadvantages of having a really long weapon. So a really long weapon takes much, much longer to shrink down. So as you run around, your reticle will expand as you change movement states, become a less stable firing platform. It shrinks back down as you become more stable and more used to what you're doing, and the time it takes to do that is dependent upon the weapon. So for example, a submachine gun is very, very quick as you maneuver it around to come back to its standard accuracy, while a rifle takes a lot longer. But the rifle will come down to a much smaller reticle in the end, so the rifle becomes much more accurate at long-range shots on our larger maps. And so what we've come up with is a very nice differentiation between classes of weapons. Pistols are very, very quick, but not very accurate at long range. Submachine guns are a nice mix. Assault rifles are very, very good at long range shots, but aren't really good when you're maneuvering around in a tight space. I think a lot of it is, again, comes back to the performance issue. For example, I would really like a true ballistics model. I think that our one weakness is the fact that you can in fact hit with a pistol at much longer ranges than you can in real life. So the game allows you to essentially snipe with a pistol if you're really, really good. And even though we drop off the ballistics model of it so that it's not as damaging, the fact remains that getting hit with a bullet in the head at, even a low-powered round is still pretty severe. So what we'd rather do is have you miss at that range. Unfortunately, with the current computing power we have, we couldn't do a nice arcing ballistics model that meant that the pistols were simply less accurate at that range. What we want, really ideally like to have them drop off and hit the ground in front of the guy or whatever, make it much, much harder to hit. So that still gnaws at me, but it was a compromise we had to make because of performance considerations, not because we didn't want to do it. The message boards are very, very important to us. They're actually very important to me personally. I spend a lot of time on the message boards talking with our fans, discussing things with them, sometimes getting into little mini arguments with them. So just the amount of time I spend on them shows how important it is to me and to us as a company. We got a lot of great ideas for Rogue Spear from the message boards. The only way to find out what players like and don't like is to go out and talk to the players and see. We have to temper a lot of it because you have a very small sampling. I mean, we sold hundreds of thousands of copies of Rainbow Six. We maybe have 200 people active on the forums at any one time. That's a fairly small sample, and it's a fairly vocal sample, but it's also a very critical sample to our feature. These are the guys that are really the hardcore diehards. They're the ones that are going to talk it up to other people. So keeping them happy is very important to us. They had lots of great ideas. I mean, it was funny, after we released Rogue Spear, the common thing in the message boards was, hey, that was my idea. No, it was my idea. Getting into fights about who had told us how to do it. Half the time it did come from the forum, half the time it was an idea we already had, but the forum validated it. They let us know what we've done wrong. So it's not just what we did right or what new things we want, but what things they don't like that we should either remove or change completely. And when we do ship, they're our best, most immediate feedback of what we might have gotten wrong when it shipped that might lead to a patch coming out. So they're very important. They've had great ideas. They've come up with things we would never think of. They play the games in ways we'd never imagined. So, I mean, they're a very, very important part of the franchise as we continue to move forward.
It's really tricky to balance the level for single player and for multiplayer. So a lot of times ahead of time when we start the level, we'll decide, is this going to be primarily single player, or do we want to kind of lean this one towards multiplayer action? Because for single player, we need to have plenty of single play in there, but we want to have some of the levels that will make really good multiplayer spaces. So we take the space and we say this one would lean really good towards a multiplayer space of some kind. So let's kind of design it that way. But in some cases, like the Ruined City, for example, it's we wanted it to be so big that we didn't think we didn't want to strictly contain it to multiplayer gameplay. We wanted to focus on the single player for the Ruined City. Now, it turned out to be a great multiplayer space, but that's only because people could block off sections of the city and play within it. We use 3 Studio Max to build the levels. We use our own in-house exporter that we built. It's a plugin in Max, and so once we get the geometry built in Max, we then export it into our game. We use Photoshop to make most of the textures, although we use other various programs to collect resources, modify resources, that kind of thing. Once we've exported it, we use an in-house built mission editor that we use to script the level. Lighting is done in a tool that we also built in-house, and that tool uses the renderer that we use in-game. So the results we get in lighting the levels in that tool are what it's going to look like in the game. I can say definitely takes 8.5 weeks with our figure after Rainbow Six. Some take longer, some take shorter. Hopefully not many take longer, but we can whip out levels really quick now. So.